Thanks for having me in.
You're welcome. Thank you. I have a few questions for you I'd like to ask. First question is, the TAB report came out, and it probably didn't, you probably weren't shining the conservative light that you wanted to be shining. Can you answer the TAB report? Was it accurate? Give you a chance to respond to that?
Oh, sure. I would never say that a report's not accurate, but I think it reflects the questions from the legislation that Mr. Koopman researched. And that's fine. Those are the particular bills that he placed a very high value on. But what it doesn't take into consideration is the different legislation that I personally worked on for property rights issues and the work that I did in financing claims and committee work in trying to reduce the budget that the citizens of Montana are ultimately responsible for. So I won't say that it's not accurate. It certainly is. It's work that he did, but it's based on legislation that he selected. That's all.
Correct. So it's not all inclusive. Let's say.
Correct.
Very good. Very good. You know, I know you're a proponent of oil. I know you're a proponent of Montana energy, or more specifically, Montana energy independence. Can you speak about that, about Montana energy independence, and your thoughts on that, and the plans you might have for that?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. That's a really good question. It's not just Montana energy independence. It's our nation's energy independence, and I think it's good for our economy, and it certainly is good for the nation's security. Right now, it's evidenced that it's eastern Montana and western North Dakota are one of the greatest places to seek employment in the nation right now. That is one of the hot spots for employment, and so clearly it's good for the economy. And with the new techniques that they have with fracking technology, it disturbs the surface area so much less than the old drilling techniques. And now that we're starting to establish additional pipelines to get the product out of here, it's not only a safer way to transport the product, but it is also a much more efficient way to transport it out, and that generates jobs as well.
Right on. You know, here's a big one that's pretty much affecting every person in the country: Obamacare. We'll hold my thoughts on Obamacare for now, but I'd like to hear what you think about it, if you don't mind.
I'm a free market person, and this clearly is not a free market proposal. It's the federal government taking over 1/6 of our economy and dictating to the citizens where they're going to get their health care, how they're going to get their health care, who's going to provide their health care, and everybody talks about the promises that were made as far as keeping your own doctor and keeping your own insurance, and we know that that's not true. But in addition to that, we were also assured as part of this great big takeover that everyone's premiums were going to go down, and that it was going to reduce the impact that the healthcare system had on the national debt. And we certainly know that those two items aren't true either.
Correct. You're correct. You know, I was doing some research for the interview, and I noticed that your Second Amendment voting record is excellent.
Yes.
I'm a Second Amendment guy.
As I am.
As I got that. Can you, if you don't mind, give me your views just generally on the Second Amendment, and how important is that to you? I mean, how important is that for a free nation to have the Second Amendment rights?
It's critical. It is absolutely critical. I went and listened to Justice Scalia about 3 or 4 months ago. He came to Bozeman. I had the opportunity to go down there and listen to him speak. And he laid it out best when he said the Second Amendment was put into the Constitution not to preserve our right to go hunting. The Second Amendment was put into the Constitution to make sure that we could protect ourselves against a tyrannical government, and that's why it is in place. And that's why I think it is just critical that it is not undermined in any way, shape, or form.
Excellent. I agree. You know, I did a video on my website, Northwest Survey News, maybe 6 weeks ago with Ken Ivory. I'm sure you know Ken.
I do.
And I think, by last estimation, 34% of the property in Montana is managed by the federal government. You know, what is your thoughts on the feds managing our real estate, A, and managing the resources contained therein? And what about overall your thoughts on states' rights?
I'm glad you brought up Ken Ivory, because he's really been the spearhead for the American Lands Council, and I've been involved in several telephone conference calls, and also had the opportunity to sit down with Ken myself. He actually was at the same conference where Justice Scalia spoke, and I was able to sit next to Ken through that entire thing. And We both agree that states' rights have been eroded since the 17th Amendment went through, and we need to get back to having the states function more independently and get away from the centralized federal government. And the only way that we're going to be able to ultimately achieve that is if we have the control and management of that. It's about 35% of Montana's land that is federal public lands. They're, is what they are described as. But if they were public lands, I have a hard time understanding why we're not able to go in there and harvest the resources. I have a hard time understanding why they're denying access to people for recreational purposes. They're literally putting gates across these areas and putting berms behind the gates and denying access and use of these properties. And instead we're left with accepting a PILT check, payment in lieu of taxes, which is just basically it's a welfare check for the state so that we don't use these lands. And we need to get back to the place where we have the management and control of those lands. And that goes along with the state's rights. Right now, I truly believe if we had the control and management of those lands, we would not be quite so dependent upon the federal government for our funding. Right now, the state receives 42% of all our revenue that the state spends each year comes from the federal government. 42% of all of the revenue that the state of Montana spends annually is provided by the federal government. That's frightening. And if we were able to utilize these areas and manage these areas ourselves, I am certain that we wouldn't be so dependent upon the federal government, nor all the rules and regulations that go along with that.
Well, you know what I noticed as a side note, it seems that the federal government takes the money from the states and then they hang it back over their head and sort of dangle it as a carrot and say, if you want some of this money back, you'll comply.
Mm-hmm.
In closing, if you could, if you're speaking to some of the potential voters out there, in closing, let them know why they should vote for Matt Rosendale, please.
I think folks are tired of having voting for individuals that campaign one way and serve another way. And I've got 60 legislators across the state that have publicly endorsed me. And the reason that they publicly endorsed me is because they know that I serve the way that I campaign. And that if you go in and check the records, you will find that I support clearly the most consistent advocate for resource development, for property rights, and for gun rights of all the folks that are running for this office right now. And I certainly would appreciate your support.
Matt, thanks for joining us today on Northwest Liberty News.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it.
Rocky Mountain air smells a lot like freedom. Northwest Liberty News.